Welcome back to my shop. Today I wanted to show you how I made my first segmented bowl. This is probably my third or fourth project on the lathe, so I am no expert, but I wanted to show you just how it went for me. As with most of my projects, there were some things that didn't turn out, so I had to transition and just work with it to make it turn out in the end. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys that are beginning as well, to see the mistakes that other people are making and how you can work with them rather than throw the project away. Let me show you how I made this. To help me figure out the correct sizing for the segments, I went to blocklayer.com. This is absolutely free. And you can see right here that there's an area here where you put in all of the information. To start off, I put in 8 segments because I have 8 pieces I'm working with. Then I changed the radius to 5 inches. That just measures from the inside of the bowl to the outside of your ring. Next, I changed my thickness to 1.5 inches. So this just means that my circle will be 1.5 inches, giving me plenty of room to work with. And then it gives you the whole layout and lets you see what it's going to look like here. Now it actually shows a piece, so it shows you exactly how long you need to make your pieces, as well as how wide. You can also see over here that it's asking for a 22.5 degree cut. There's also a lot more information that can help you, but I'm not quite sure how to use this yet. Just for reference, this is exactly what I cut for my bowl. And now I just headed to the table saw and started cutting down my wood to 1 5/8 inches. Then I headed over to the miter saw and I just set up my saw blade using the Wixie just to make sure that I was getting the measurements correct. Then I cut a stop block just so that I can set it up and make sure that they are exactly the same length. And now to the cutting. I cut 4 pieces of the walnut and 4 pieces of the tiger wood for all of the bottom rings. For the top ring, I just cut 8 of maple. So my husband has made 2 of these segmented bowls, which makes him an expert, so he is my instructor. So it's kind of like the blind leading the blind here. And now I'm just doing a dry fit, just to see how they're going to sit together. I used a metal band that, to be honest, I'm not even really sure what they're used for, probably like plumbing or something like that. But it was something we had in the shop, but they work great for holding all these pieces together. And then I'm just setting them on, seeing how they all fit together. Now, I can see I kind of have a problem here. The first 2 fit great, but those last 2 are just really in there. So unless I'm going for a bowl that just really goes in towards the bottom, I'm going to need to do something to fix that. At this point, I was very frustrated that those bottom 2 didn't work out. So I was going to scrap this and start all over again. But that seemed a little drastic, so I decided I'd see what I could work with here. So for those bottom 2 that are just a little too small, I'm going to add in some maple strips in there that will tie in to the top, so it should look like it fits there, and it will make them just a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to cut these maple strips at 90 degrees. Again, using the stop just to make sure that I'm getting them all the same size. Just loosening up the wire band and sliding these pieces in. This is a much better fit, gives me room to work with, and I really like how the profile is going to look. Then I just used a thick piece of maple to put on the bottom. Now you'll notice as I put the 8 pieces together, my 22.5 degree cut was just ever so slightly off. So you can see that when I put them all together, that last piece just does not fit in there. So I'm going to take each of the pieces and just take off ever so slightly, pushing on the high areas, going around and just doing each one until I get it to fit in there correctly. This is a bit tricky. I had one of them where I went just a little too far, and then I had to make adjustments the other direction. So just take your time. You want them to fit together as perfectly as you can. Then I sanded down all the rough edges because I didn't want it to interfere with the glue up. Now for the glue up, I'm using a waterproof and food safe glue. So I'm just making sure that I have glue on all the edges, and you can't really see in the video, but I'm kind of pressing them back and forth as I put it in there, just making sure that the glue really gets set. Once I have the glue all on, I'm putting my wire ring around it and just tightening it up so that it will pull all those edges together. Then I just used a scrap piece of wood just to make sure that the wood is all down and level and there aren't any high points. Now to the drum sander just to sand everything down. If you don't have a drum sander, you can easily do this with a sheet of sandpaper. Now that I have them all flat, bringing them into the house so I can do my glue up. I marked where my piece was going to go, and I'm just making sure to get lots of glue, cover all of the areas, just to give it a nice strong hold and to make sure that I don't show any gaps in the end. And I just grabbed some weights to put on there and let it dry. As you can see, I glued up 2 sections at once, and then I glued up the one on top of the other. And not shown, but I did glue on the maple base as well. Now I had a bit of an issue because I did not use a perfectly round piece for the base. So I didn't quite know where the center was. So you definitely don't need to get this technical. My husband pulled out this strange contraption from the shop and we set it up to make sure that the chuck was in the very center of this piece of maple, using a Lazy Susan and some Legos and I don't know, whatever else we could find in our living room. Then I pre-marked the holes and pre-drilled. I put in screws to hold the chuck in place. And now to the lathe. The beginning process is always the hardest for me, or maybe just the part that makes me the most nervous, because you're dealing with these really sharp points. So I like to go through and just as much as I can kind of get down those points. This is crazy messy. As you can see, it's building up inside my boot and all over my hand. I'm essentially just wearing this stuff. The one thing I really like about the lathe work is just watching what you can create out of a chunk of wood. At this point, I have a real good start on the outside, so I'm just moving the lathe over so that I can position myself to get the inside of the bowl. And now really working on the inside. Just doing the same as I did with the outside. Again, being very careful and slow in the beginning since I'm really working with some sharp points in there. And once I got the inside exactly how I wanted it, I moved back to the outside. Now on to the sanding. Sanding is so easy to do on a lathe. I do find that I like using a sanding block just to hold the sandpaper. I do similar to a cutting board and I just work up through the grits. Using the air compressor, I just made sure to get any of the dust out of any gaps or any spots in there. I just don't want that to be set in with the finish. Now for the finish, I'm using Osmo. It is a food safe product, and since this bowl will be used in the kitchen potentially, I didn't want something that wasn't food safe on it. Now I did find that honestly applying it with a rag, not moving, works way better than on the lathe. I ended up doing 2 coats of Osmo, and I sanded with 1000 grit in between them. Now with the inside totally completed, I went back and I actually made some changes to the bottom of the bowl, and I did actually rework some of the outside as well just to make it flow better. In an ideal world, the outside would have been complete and I would have just been working on the bottom. But I decided to rework some of it, and since I'll be refinishing anyway, I decided to go ahead and make those adjustments. So I sanded again and then put on the Osmo 2 coats one more time. All right, here I am just taking it off of the lathe, and I took it over to the workbench to remove the chuck, since I now need to finish the bottom. Now to make sure that I'm not scraping up this bowl that I have just finished, I'm putting down some blue rags just to protect it. And I'm using the disc sander just to take off the extra maple that I have on the bottom. You could also use a handsaw or numerous other things to remove this part of the wood. And here we are, we've got a bowl. At this point, we could pretty much be done. It's level, got a flat bottom. However, I wanted to finish it and make it look a little nicer. So I have this chuck. It wasn't quite big enough, so my husband added on these metal pieces just to extend it a little bit. So now I can put the bowl on and it'll fit in tight there. Let's take it over to the lathe. Now it's a little too big, so this lathe is nice because I can actually turn it to the side and put the chuck in this way. Now it will be turning off to the side. One thing to note with these added pieces here, I have to be very careful because they're actually sticking out there and it would be easy to catch on them. So I'm just as careful as I can, staying away from that top edge completely. So I just started by sanding straight across the bottom. Then I added in a middle area that was actually recessed just a slight bit more. Honestly, the toughest part of this was making sure that it was all level rather than a little bit rounded. The other tricky part I had was sanding. When I was sanding this, it was tough not to sand out that groove that I wanted in the bottom. Next, I took it off and put on some Osmo on the bottom. Overall, I'm really happy with how this bowl turned out. I love the shape of it. I think it turned out really good. It's very smooth and goes with the lines, which I like how the bottom turned out with the inner piece in there. And you know, I'm not a big fan of the maple right in here. I've talked to some other people that have seen it and they think it looks great. For me, I think it's because I know that it was an error that I was fixing, that it just looks like a big flaw in my work. The nice thing is there's so many patterns and so many things that you can make with these. I'm really excited to build some more.